Hello everyone. Um, Today I'm going to try to do a BMX frame swap as quickly as possible. You just saw me put my phone on the screen and start a timer so I could see how quickly I could do it. So I'm not really going to try and go super fast, but I just wanted to be swift and precise, I suppose, with the process. So I don't typically upload videos this frequently, but I was really disappointed with the Transformers video that I released yesterday or the day before. There was a lot of noise coming from the packaging when I was opening the parcels containing the toys, and also partway through the recording, the sensitivity settings on the microphone I was using seemed to have reset and were not sensitive enough so that the first half of the recording session and the second half of the recording session had very different audio levels. Mix that in with the extremely loud packaging sounds. I had to do some quite drastic level editing, audio peak limiter settings, and a lot of noise reduction and hum reduction, and I feel like the dynamic range of the audio ended up really throttled and flat sounding, and I just ended up quite disappointed with the end product and just rushed to get it over and done with. And I feel like if I'm going to release videos so very infrequently, then they should be of a higher standard. So I needed to swap my BMX frame anyway, and decided that I would try and do this with the video footage that I decided to record. So why am I swapping my BMX frame? Well, the orange BMX frame that I currently use has a 20.75 inch long top tube. So what that means essentially is the bike frame itself isn't particularly long and is better suited to a shorter person. I myself am 6 foot 1 inches tall, and although I enjoy riding around with the current bike setup, I do feel as though the frame is a little too short for me, and that the size discrepancy between myself and the frame does in fact create issues in some areas, as well as advantages in others. When I was riding my bike with some friends the other day, I met this really friendly guy for the first time, and we got talking about bikes and the sizes, etc. And he said that he had a BMX frame at home that was a 21.25-inch length top tube, which when you put the orange bike and the black and grey bike frames side by side, the difference in length seems to be quite small, and you would be forgiven for thinking that the difference shouldn't really be noticeable in practice. However, the difference, although is less than 1 inch, it's actually half of an inch longer, if my maths are correct, then the difference in feel of the bike is actually quite large. I did ride this bike later on after the recording with the longer frame, and it did in fact feel much larger, despite the difference technically not being very large. It felt like the bike was more my size, and it felt more like an adult bike rather than a child's bike. It felt more stable and solid to ride around, but also I suspect it's going to be more difficult to maneuver as a result of it being longer and stable. The advantage of having a short and less stable or more nimble frame is that it's easier to manipulate it when trying to do certain tricks that involve rotations and spinning. So I need to give the longer frame more time before I decide which length is going to be right for me. The reason that this new acquaintance was so happy to give me this frame to try is because, unfortunately, the black and grey frame does have a series of rather significant dents in the top tube that most likely are causing some significant structural weaknesses. However, as I'm a beginner, I don't foresee those structural weaknesses being tested with my level of riding. And really, this is not a frame that I'm intending to keep, rather than just to try out for a while, to see if the size is more suited to my style of riding and what I'm used to doing. So far, the deconstruction of this bike is going rather smoothly. The key areas that are usually a major hang-up and time drain are removing the cranks and the bottom bracket. The cranks are the arms that the pedals are attached to, and the bottom bracket is the set of bearings that go into the bottom of the bike frame that assist the smooth rotation of the cranks. So they're all part of the same system in essence. I'm just removing the forks now and the headset. You see me putting my fingers in and pulling this bearing out of the bottom. The headset is the name given to the bearings that go into the steerer tube. One set of bearings goes into the bottom of the steering tube, and another set goes into the top, and then the fork steerer tube goes through those bearings, and then when everything is tightened together, the handlebars can turn smoothly because their rotation is facilitated by those bearings. There are some spacers and top caps, etc., that also are combined with that whole area in order to create a solid seal where the bearings are protected and the correct spacing between different parts like the forks and the handlebars and the stem. The stem being the part that holds the handlebars onto the forks. So we call those bearings the headset, essentially, and the little spaces that are associated with them. And now the frame is completely dismantled, and I'm just taking a moment to decide where I will start construction. As you can see here, I'm getting some lubricating grease and applying it to the headset bearings. I'm going to start where I finished on the first frame with the fork and the headset, etc. I decided that that would be best because once the forks and the handlebars were on, then the frame could be kind of propped up into a standing position, which would help me to start putting all the other parts in place. So that's what I'm doing now. Like I said earlier, I did try this frame briefly, and it's hard to tell because it was such a brief moment where I tried to ride the bike, and I tried to ride it in the street outside the front of our home, and the road surface is very smooth and it isn't flat, so it really isn't a good testing ground, but the bike felt definitely more my size and suited to me, but I also got the impression that perhaps it was going to make doing stunts or tricks more difficult, but I really need to get out at some point to find this out for myself through practice. It just so happens that it's Friday night right now. After this recording session, I'll be going straight to bed, but the weekend is already taken. I need to stay with my son and look after him whilst my partner goes out to do work. The thing I love about this stem, which I don't believe you've seen before because it's new since my previous bike check, is that it slides onto the fork steerer tube very smoothly and easily. The previous stem, the king stem from previous bike checks, didn't. It was very tight and it was a pain to slide down onto the fork steerer tube, and an even bigger pain to slide off again. So I'm really happy with that new stem. That stem came all the way from Japan, which is the only place where you can buy it, and it's a stem made by a manufacturer called Mullet for a BMX brand called Alive Industries. paper towel that I use to wipe excess grease off my hands or bike parts. It's quite windy. So that stem is a new addition. I believe the saddle is also a new addition that you've not seen since my previous bike check. That is a demolition matte Cordova version 2 fat pivotal saddle. It's got a kind of motorcycle style look to it with the ribbed faux leather padding, which I think is really cool. There was a two-tone brown and black saddle that I really wanted that was part of the version 1 release. However, I couldn't find it anywhere. It's very difficult to find. So, I've got the core parts to prop up the frame in place, the saddle, the handlebars and forks. So, the most difficult part is going to be let me think. The most difficult part of Reconstruction is going to be probably the bottom bracket, cranks and chain. I can tell you now, I don't know if I do it on camera. I don't think I do it later. But for this particular frame's geometry, so this has a larger rear triangle than my bike, I believe. The rear triangle, as you can see by looking at the frame, it essentially looks like two back-to-back triangles. So the front triangle would be the triangle that goes forward from the seat post towards the front of the bike and the front wheel. And so, as you can imagine, the rear triangle is the opposite and goes out towards the rear wheel. So the rear triangle on this bike is longer than on my original orange frame. And so when I reconstructed the bike and put the chain and wheels in place, I noticed that there wasn't much room left over, and my rear wheel would be too close to the joints in the frame and would rub. And so later on I did have to add an extra chain link to the chain in order to move the wheel back a bit further. So that is also going to make the bike feel quite different to what I've become accustomed to with my orange frame. But that doesn't mean it'll be worse, it just means it's something I need to try out and decide for myself if it's better or if it's worse. So I'm just putting a generous amount of grease into the BB shell, the bottom bracket shell on the frame, because these bearings need to be able to slide into that shell well, and also they need to be easily removable from the shell later on. So it's important to put a lot of grease in beforehand to facilitate installation and removal. Because if I don't like this frame, then I'm going to have to take everything back off again. And even if I do like this frame, there we go, I just became self-aware that I am in fact bending over in front of the camera frequently, so I made a point of highlighting the fact that that was happening. I lost my train of thought. Yes, even if I did like this frame and the geometry, it does have those incredibly large dents in it, which are going to cause an issue sooner or later. It's the reason that this acquaintance, friend, now I would say after the day we spent together and subsequent communications, the friend gave me the frame for free because that kind of damage is just too severe to continue riding with, especially at the level he rides. He's very, very good. I was very impressed with him all day and really loved watching him ride. So I'm just using the hammer to tap these bearings in a little bit so they don't keep falling down to the ground constantly when I'm trying to set up the cranks. So what I'm doing right now is I'm not actually installing the cranks, I'm just using the cranks and the crank installation tool as a bearing press. So as I tighten these cranks up, they're going to squeeze the bearings into the bottom bracket shell because it's really difficult to do by hand without some kind of press. A lot of people will just try to hammer them in, and it's never a good idea to spend too much time trying to hammer bearings because you'll inevitably damage them. So I'm just tightening the cranks up now so that they squeeze down on the bearings and push them into the shell. Then when I'm satisfied that they're in the shell enough, I undo the bearing in the crank installation tool and I'll take the crank arm back off and put all the necessary spacers back in place before legitimately installing everything for the final time. Just needs a little wiggle to get off. Thankfully, some cranks can be very, very tight and very difficult to remove. Thankfully, these ones aren't. So I'm just cleaning off any spacers, and I think they're called spacers. When you have the bottom bracket on the frame like that, you get these kind of large cones that go on top of the bearings that act as a way to protect the bearings from impacts and also to prevent grease and grime, etc. from getting into the bearing itself. They also create the correct amount of spacing for the crank arms and the sprocket, which will help to create a nice straight chain alignment from the sprocket down to the cassette on the rear wheel, making sure that that chain is in as straight a line as possible so it doesn't get damaged while you're riding. Now something really odd happened when I installed this bottom bracket. I was able to tighten it to the point where the cranks themselves got a bit stiff and slowed down, which tells me that the sizes are slightly different to the sizes on my original frame. I think that the BB shell on this frame is either narrower or wider than the one on mine, and it appears to be causing an issue of some sort. I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, I've tightened them down, and now I'm just putting the compression bolt in that just keeps it all in place and stops it from coming loose whilst you're riding. And I would say that that is the part of the installation done that poses the biggest threat of causing a major slowdown. Usually when you get stuck for a long time on a bike build, it's because of the bottom bracket and the cranks. Something is just too tight and won't go where it's supposed to go. the chain installation, you have to break a chain when you want to install it or remove it on your BMX bike, and I believe on any bike, because it always threads through the rear triangle of the bike. And I'm just trying to think right now. Yes, it has to, and the reason that it has to is because you need as straight as possible chain going from your sprocket down to the cassette on the rear wheel. The cassette on the rear wheel, you could call it cog or chain ring, but basically you've got your large chain ring at the front that is rotated by the pedals, and then you've got your chain ring on your rear wheel, and the chain feeds between those two rings, and the front chain ring with the pedals and the rear chain ring on the rear wheel need to be as close to perfectly in line as they can possibly be in order for the bicycle to operate smoothly and for all the parts to have a long life without any unnecessary wear from weird angles. So that's why the chain needs to get fed around the rear triangle so that it can stay as close to a straight line between those two sides as possible. So as you can see here, we're getting really close to the end now. The front wheel and the handlebars are all on, and the seat is on. The bottom bracket and the cranks and pedals are all on, and the chain is installed, which I thought was actually done quite quickly, if I do say so myself. So now the rear wheel is on, and I just need to get the pegs with the axle bolts inside them onto the axles of the rear wheel, so I can tighten it up and call it a day. There was a little bit of time wasted right at the beginning. I was kind of explaining the situation around creating this video rather than observing what was actually happening in the video at the time. But what was happening in the video at the time was that I took a chain tensioner screw, it's a long screw essentially, from my orange frame, and I tried to install it on this black and grey frame. And the chain tensioner is a long screw that you can use to put through the rear triangle at its point that meets the rear wheel. You can put it straight through a hole in the frame if that frame is designed that way, and out the other side of the hole, where it will then push the axle of the rear wheel away from the bottom bracket area, and you can use these chain tensioner screws to create tension for the chain. So you don't want to have a loose chain. Some people like to ride with a loose chain. And some people like to ride with an incredibly tight chain. I feel that a loose chain can cause warping and damage to the chain, and I feel like a tight chain can cause warping and damage to the chain and the bicycle parts that it runs around. I just feel like generally I want a kind of tight chain, but nothing. But I still want it to have a little bit of wiggle in it, so I can grab it with my finger and I can wiggle it up and down a good amount. That's where I like it to be. And with a chain tensioner, I can achieve exactly the amount of slack in my chain that I desire. said, unfortunately, the chain tensioner that fits my orange frame for some reason will not fit this frame. So that time spent at the beginning of the video, where I seem to be fidgeting with the frame and not dismantling the orange frame, was looking at that chain tensioner, removing it for starters. It's a long screw, so it takes a fair few rotations in order to remove it, and then testing to see if it would go on this black and grey frame. As you can see here, I'm using my feet against the bicycle frame as leverage whilst I grab the rear wheel with my hand and pull it, and then with my other hand tighten the axles on the rear bolts of the wheel. So this is kind of an old school way to pull your wheel back and create tension in your chain. It's not ideal and it's not precise, but it's one way of doing things when you don't have a chain tensioner or a similar device or tool in order to help you get the exact position of the rear wheel that you desire. For the sake of this kind of speed run, I leave the bike as it is, but I can tell you now that the rear wheel did need to come back more because it was in danger of rubbing on the frame in the rear triangle. The rear triangle is a lot narrower on this black and grey frame than it is on my orange frame, and so the wheel needs to be further back where the triangle widens up in order to avoid it rubbing. The other thing that you may not notice, I'm sure a lot of you will, but a lot of you won't notice either, is that my forks are backwards. My entire front wheel is pointing the wrong way, and I haven't noticed that. I finish off this entire build with the wheel facing backwards. It got rotated around at some point before I started tightening everything up properly, and I never noticed. And this is where I thought I had everything in hand and was kind of rushing towards the finish line of this experiment, this little speed run time trial that I've tried to engage in, and I've missed it. So I think I'm all good and dandy here and completed it. And in fact, the only reason that I noticed is because when I went to take a photo, there we go. So the build was technically finished in 35 minutes, 41 seconds, and 65 hundredths of a second, which is very quick, I would say. It could be done quicker if I was really trying to be incredibly fast. But as you can see, hopefully now that I've pointed it out to you, that front wheel was most definitely on backwards, and I only really noticed when I went to take a photo to send to my friend who gave me the frame, and it was at that point, thankfully before I sent him the photo, that I noticed, oh my gosh, I've put the forks on backwards, which is a first for me. I've done some really stupid things when building bikes in the past, but putting the forks on backwards has never been one of those stupid things until today, so I can add that to the list of stupid things that I've done. But here I am, rectifying the mistake. So I suppose you could say that time that I posted, I think it was about 35 minutes and 41 seconds or something like that, is not accurate because I had to go back and fix a mistake that I made, but it's pretty close, I would say. There was a constructed bike, and technically you could get on that bike and ride it if you wanted to. So I just had to stop to cough, and the thing that I noticed is that if you do pause on this audio recorder, not stop, but pause, it will still reset the audio level that you are recording at, which is annoying. But I learned that from that Transformers video, so hopefully I've avoided it from doing that again, prevented it from doing that again, and I've set the level to where it should be before I began recording again. Now the bike build, the frame swap, should I say, is completed. After I rode the bike a bit, I did add another chain link, and I also lowered the seat slightly and angled it up a little bit more, just mainly for looks. I just preferred the look of it that way, and I think I have to say this frame does suit all my other components a lot better. Just matchup wise, I don't know if I'd say it looks better overall, but it definitely looks good, I think. And that is this frame swap video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you all in the next one. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.